I was walking in the wild bush country of Africa. Trees grew all around me, except for the occasional opening where you could see that impala had fed on grass, and warthogs had rooted up the ground with their tusks to find something to eat. 15-foot-tall termite mines dotted the landscape. There was an occasional baobab tree there. I was hunting impala. Walking ahead of me was the Zambian government guide that everyone hunting had to take with me. We were walking, all of a sudden we heard a noise, rustling in the underbrush, and the guide put up his hand and he whispered, "Stop, lion." We looked through the underbrush and there we could see the horns of an eland and the carcass lying there. And that's when we heard the sound that sent shivers down our spine. The deep-throated roar of a male lion not more than 50 yards away. What do we think of that lion's roar? It frightened us to our very core. But if you think about it, not every creature in Africa's plains are afraid of the male lion's roar. For human beings or impala, the lion's roar is frightening. Why shouldn't it be? You have a 550-pound carnivore with jaws that can just crush your head. But not every animal on Africa's plains is afraid of that roar. See, male lions are very protective of their pride. When that lion cub is surrounded by hyenas who want to kill him, the best sound in the world is the deep-throated roar of a male lion, because that sound means safety, security, and protection. Joel, he describes a different roar in our sermon text. A louder and more deep-throated roar than that of a male lion. Joel describes that roar as part of the description of Judgment Day, the last day that he gives us in verses 12 through 15. Look at those verses again. He says, "Let the nations be roused, let them advance into the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all nations on every side. Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Trample the grapes, for the winepress is full, and the vats overflow. So great is their wickedness." Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and moon will be darkened, and the stars no longer shine. Joel's picture of Judgment Day happens in the valley of Jehoshaphat. That was a valley in Old Testament times where God came and defeated his enemies, Moab, Ammon, Edom, during the time when King Jehoshaphat was king of Judah. And they didn't even have to do anything to win that battle. The scene described in 2 Chronicles 20 is incredible. While Jehoshaphat's armies and the Levites are singing praises to God on the top of a hill, God, the Lord, turns the Ammonites and Edomites against the Moabites and they destroy them. Then he turns the Edomites and Ammonites against each other. They destroy each other. And God wins the victory. So it's probably fitting that the name Jehoshaphat in Hebrew means the Lord judges. The valley of Jehoshaphat, a perfect picture, symbol for what happens on Judgment Day, right? The next scene that Joel paints in his picture of Judgment Day, it's a harvest scene, right? Swing the sickle. Pictures how God will cut down and throw into the fires of hell anyone who doesn't believe in him, just as a harvester would do to sheaves of wheat. Trample the grapes, he said. Pictures how God will crush in with his judgment in hell anyone whose vat is overflowing with the wickedness of sin because they didn't trust in Jesus to empty their vat of sin. All that's going to happen in the valley of decision. It reminds us on Judgment Day, the only decision that's going to matter is God's decision, right? The sun and the moon will be darkened. The stars will no longer shine on Judgment Day. And then you hear it, right? Louder than the roar of any male lion in the African night, the Lord will roar from Zion and thunder from Jerusalem. So what do you think of the Lord's roar? Is it scary? Should you be frightened at the Lord's roar? Well, let me ask you this question. Does the Lord have a reason to judge you in the valley of Jehoshaphat? Does he have a reason to swing the sickle and throw you and me into the fires of hell? Our vats, are they overflowing with our sinfulness? Stop and think. In your lifetime, how many sins have you committed? Thought, word, and deed? 100,000? 1,000,000? 10 million? Our vats are overflowing, aren't they? Stop and think. How many times in my life have I made decisions according to my thinking that I knew were contrary to God's thinking? The Lord's roar should frighten us, shouldn't it? Because it reminds us that God's judgment is absolute. The wages of sin is death, and the soul that sins will die. Our gospel lesson reminded us that we live here as wheat among the weeds, right? In other words, we live here as believers amongst unbelievers. And that's not easy to do, is it? You look at your neighbors who just live for themselves and have all their toys and fun, and you go, well, why can't I have that much fun? I'm supposed to live for God and others now. Or you look at your neighbors and you see, well, they don't spend 2 to 3 hours every Sunday of their time worshiping their Lord. They don't give 10% back to the Lord and give of their time and talents to Him. Is it worth it for me to do that? Or you look at your neighbors and you say, they don't get made fun of for what they believe in or what they say. Is it worth it? Living as a wheat plant amongst the weeds? And are you tempted that maybe your motivation to live as a wheat plant among the weeds is that you're afraid of the Lord's roar of judgment? I don't want to end up as a weed in hell, so I'm going to try to live as a wheat plant. Is that the reason we should try to live that way? No. When the Lord roars in judgment and it frightens us like an impala, God's purpose is only that we see our sin. We see that our sin is damning and damaging, and that we confess our sin to Him. We despair of any hope in ourselves of getting rid of our sin, and we put all our hope in God. You see, what the Lord wants you and me to do when we hear the Lord's roar of judgment is not feel like that scared impala who's going to get punished, but we feel like that lion cub. We hear that roar and we hear there's safety, there's deliverance, there's protection there. Isn't that the comforting picture that Joel paints on Judgment Day of the Lord's roar? Look at the last part of 16. But the Lord will be a refuge for His people, a stronghold for His people of Israel. Picture yourself on the top of Horsetooth Mountain, the very top of the rock up there. Your enemies are pursuing you, but you're on top. They can try to climb up and get you, and you can just push them off. That's your refuge. That's your stronghold. That's the picture that we're given here in these words, the same kind of what was in our psalm. The Lord's your stronghold when the weeds of the world ridicule you for what you believe in, when your college professor makes fun of you in front of the whole class because you believe in creation. Isn't the Lord your stronghold? Think of Psalm 118. The Lord is with me. Of what shall I be afraid? What can man do to me? Isn't the Lord your refuge when you're afraid of the punishment of sin? When Satan wants to make you think that sin is the big bar across heaven's door that won't let you in, then the Lord reminds you He's your refuge. Think of Isaiah 53. But the Lord has laid on Jesus the iniquity of us all, right? And the Lord's our stronghold when we're tempted to make decisions according to our thinking, not His. We think to Psalm 119, your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. And he goes on to say in that psalm that your commands make me wiser than my enemies. And isn't God a refuge? Because remember, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, who's going to judge? Only the Lord. Not others, not other people, not even you yourself. Sally's boyfriend wants her to go all the way with him, but she doesn't want to. But she's worried about what he'll think and whether he'll dump her or not. Tom and Mary's marriage isn't going as well as it could because Mary's so concerned about what her parents think of her. Bob, he's still beating himself up because of how he ruined his marriage. And he's wondering what other people think of him. And then there's Cindy, the 78-year-old grandmother, who's got a really tender conscience and is constantly wondering, how is God going to judge her on the last day? Well, on Judgment Day, it's not going to matter what your college professor thinks of you. When you're breathing your last breath, it's not going to matter what Satan has to say to you. On Judgment Day, it's not going to matter what Sally's boyfriend thinks, what Mary's parents think, what other people think of Bob, nor does it matter what Cindy feels and thinks about herself. The only thing that's going to matter on Judgment Day is that you and I will be in the valley of decision. And the only decision that's going to matter is the Lord's decision. And God's already decided to demonstrate His love for us. And this, Paul says in Romans, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God already decided to put all of your and my sin on Jesus and judge Him as guilty in our place. God has already decided to take all of Jesus' holy, perfect life and transfer it to you so you are perfect and holy and ready for heaven. And when you know what God has done for you in Jesus, then the Lord's roar of judgment, it's comforting, isn't it? When you hear the Lord's roar, holding on to Jesus and everything He's done for you, it's just like being that little lion cub and hearing the roar. And that's what our lives are like, right? Because Satan and his pack of hyena devils prowls around us, trying to destroy us and take away our faith. And so we hear the Lord's roar, and it's comforting. Because it's not the roar of a 550-pound lion, it's the roar of the Almighty Eternal God. There's no sin that our Lord can't forgive. There is no temptation that your Lord cannot uphold you under. There is no suffering you can go through that your Lord cannot sustain you through it. And there is no power in heaven, on earth, or under the earth that can keep the Lord from taking you to heaven. So listen to the Lord's roar. Is there anything more important that you could do? God said that I'll judge all the nations on every side. The fact that all people are going to face judgment, doesn't that change the decisions that you and I are going to make in life? You're going to face judgment. So listen to the Lord's roar as you come to the Lord's Supper and find their refuge for your sin. Listen to the Lord's roar every week in worship. Come to the Bible study and listen to His roar. Parents, this school year, are you going to let your kids listen to the Lord's roar in Sunday school? So they hear that roar as a lion cub and are comforted? Or are you going to leave them out of Sunday school and let them go around the year frightened like a little impala at the things around them? And what about your neighbors? And what about your friends? Are you going to leave the Lord's roar for them, a frightening roar like an impala hears? Or are you going to tell them about Jesus so that roar becomes a comforting roar that a little lion cub hears? It's interesting, isn't it, that the Bible calls Jesus the Lion of Judah, right? On the last day, all that matters is that the Lord is going to roar. And for you and me, that roar is from the Lion of Judah. Rejoice in that. Amen.